the package I sent you yet?
Yes, I did.
There's enough DVDs there to take you to the next century.
Now all I have to do is buy another computer in Premiere.
Oh boy.
So it'll be a while till I figure out a way to encode those, but
there are some ripping software. I'm trying to think of one of them that FoxPro uses a lot. It's very, very good results. Jason, thank you again for organizing this and thinking it up.
Yeah, absolutely.
You get the Cupid Doll Award.
Well, yeah, McLean's a great guy. Like I said, I've known him for years, and one thing I love about McLean is he shares. He's just such a smart technical guy, but is also extremely creative. One of those rare breeds that uses both sides of the brain very well. Like.
Well, just looking at some of the videos that he did, obviously those were well produced.
Yes.
Videos done. These were not home videos that were done.
No. And let's be honest, the video game industry is it's changing things. It's sort of been pandemic proof. It's doing very well. It's a I think I mentioned that in the email. I was reading some comments from the CEO of Netflix, and when he was talking about how their main competition is not Disney or anyone else, it's actually the video game industry. So
I must say that in the last couple of weeks, I've been having so many meetings with people with face masks that I'm almost uncomfortable to be looking at you guys.
Yeah. I know
exactly. Seeing masks. What's wrong with this picture?
Yeah. Isn't it shocking how now I was looking at photos of one of my daughter's christenings the other day, and I was like, what's everyone doing huddled together like that?
Yeah. True.
McLean.
One of the old programmers that broadcast picks died.
There you are, center stage.
Great.
How you doing, McLean?
Can you hear me? Can you see me?
I can. Yeah, sounds great.
Okay, great. Let me try one thing. So I mostly have a PowerPoint with some audio in it. So let me just flip through that to get to some of the sound and see if you can hear it. And then I have a separate program I'm going to do a demo in at the very end.
Okay.
Great.
Screen sharing is enabled.
Okay.
Voila.
And then this will go here. Got all my nice slides, some surprises here. So can you hear this?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
See it and hear it? Great. Okay. That's not me, by the way. It's not my music. Somebody else. I'm taking the credit for someone else's hard work.
Good. The American way.
Yeah.
And then this, I'm going to show this at the end. It's very complicated. We'll talk about it at the end, but I mostly just want to make sure you can hear it.
Great.
How's that sound?
Oh, yeah.
Good. Okay.
I'll turn my sound up.
Yeah, it's a little quiet. It'll get loud in a second. Hang on. Good.
Good.
Great.
Sounds good, McLean.
Sounds formidable.
Yeah, well, it's when you're in a fight, when there's a giant enemy bearing down on you.
Or a six-headed spider or whatever.
Exactly. Yeah, you never know. Cool. Well, thanks again for having me. I'm excited to do this. Some of this stuff is stuff I've only talked about loosely. I've never really formalized it like this, and I was working on these slides till like 2 hours ago.
Oh, wow.
But it's helpful to organize your thoughts, and I think I might actually have too much to talk about, so I'm going to try to have a little timer going so that there's time for questions at the end, or if there's stuff I can skip and say we can cover this at the end if people have questions.
Okay, great.
McLean, we should share a little bit about what the group is. We're the New England section of SMPTE, and it would be probably unfair to say that all we do is sprocket holes and film sizes and all that. Obviously,
do it.
SMPTE has changed a lot in the last 100 years. Marty Feldman just came on. There he is. He's our chairman. But let me finish quickly. There's about 175 members, and then another 240 or so invitees who aren't members who come to the meetings. So in theory, there's probably 400 invitations that went out, and we
Great.
might have 25 to 50 who will participate tonight.
Okay, fantastic.
We'll see what happens. I'm going to shut up and let Marty introduce himself. You're muted. You're muted.
Classic, the classic 2020 mistake.
We can't hear you, Marty. He's Mark. Let me see if I can unmute him.
Oh, there we go. Oh,
I did it here.
There we go.
All right. Good. Start again.
Well, first of all, McLean, I want to thank you for being here tonight. And
My pleasure.
looking forward to this. You have a very varied background and career in all aspects of composing, scoring, and I'm really looking forward to hearing about it.
Great.
And Jason, I want to thank you also for making this possible.
Absolutely. And Marty came up with the idea, you know, we wanted to go back, you know, and cover the film scoring, you know, aspect of the industry. And, you know, we were discussing the SMPTE, you know, the main SMPTE national meeting was on esports and stuff like that. So we're sort of talking about why don't we sort of transition into that a little bit. And, you know, I know someone who scores for games, and that's kind of how this kind of came about. So.
Yeah, absolutely. It's pretty amazing the work that's going into these into games and esports, and it's growing by leaps and bounds. And the technical quality is just getting better and better, including the music. So and I want to shout out to Steve Barker out in California, and thanks for joining us, Steve. Nice to see you once again. And Bob Lamb. And I guess people are starting to pop on now that we're getting close to 7 o'clock. So I said before, while I was muted, that I'm the long-suffering chair here of SMPTE New England. Must be going on a decade now.
No, Marty has been there since the Crimean War. It was the 1830s or 1840s. I can't remember which.
Hey, Paul.
Yep. Hey, Bruce. Good to see you.
Likewise.
Good to see you down there. How are things in Cumberland?
Oh, pretty good. Yeah, I see Mike every Sunday.
Good.
Yep.
So, so McLean, you've done some really interesting work on things like the Beatles Rock Band 1 and 2, and I'd like to hear a little bit about some of that. I know some of these. There were some clips online when we sent out our notice. You can take a look at some of these clips and see what McLean has done. Really very, very interesting. Robin Shahid, I see you're with us too. Hi, Robin. How are you? Have you got audio yet? I just lost everything. Hold on one second.
We still see you.
You still see me?
And hear you. Yeah.
There we go. I'm back.
Robin is not unmuting. I can ask to unmute.
Yeah, okay. That's fine.
And just went away.
And,
We're all learning new things with Zoom. You know, every day it's a different thing.
It is indeed, and they keep sending upgrades that I haven't done. I want to plug our next month's meeting, which is still, the date is tentatively January 20th, and it's with Florical Systems. And if you're into television automation, both the master control automation and complete station automation, they are a major player. And they've signed up for the January 20th meeting. There's a possibility the date will change depending on availability of presenters, but that should be a good meeting. They're also a big supporter of SMPTE on the international level. So we haven't done anything on that type of station automation for a while. We also haven't done a film scoring meeting in probably a dozen years or so. The last one was with the Berkeley College of Music. So we got a lot of catching up to do on that basis. As Paul Beck says, SMPTE takes us all the way from film sprocket holes to digital bits, which is where we are now. If only they could have seen that then. That's pretty amazing.
I just got an email from McLean. His internet dropped out, but he's getting his computer and will be right back in.
Oh, okay. Okay. We can't do it without McLean. Okay.
That's the beauty of these Zoom events is, you can reach more people and have more people, like McLean's out in California now, but you run into all these silly little bugs, at the same time.
My wife is teaching violin and piano over Zoom, and it's been very challenging at times. Steve, as you know, we're about to get a big nor'easter out here.
Yeah, I moved down here just in time.
Just in time, that's
I
right.
was feeling kind of lonely and sad down here, but now I feel a little better.
Yeah, we might get 16 inches of snow. That's a big one. Last year was almost nothing.
Robert Lamb, are you the guy from Chicago?
No,
Okay, just want
he
to
must be
sure.
related to me somehow, but I don't know. But when I used to call up the airlines to make reservations, they always used to question that I was flying economy.
I have 10 of 7, so we're a little early. So I'm just going to mute my mic here, and I'll be here if anybody needs me.
Hey, Paul,
Yes, sir.
I don't see any quad machines in the background. What's wrong?
No, but there is an NTSC CRT monitor just for old time.
I see that. So it looks like McLean is still offline here. I don't see him anywhere. Bad time to have a computer failure.
I think he's probably just changing
Yeah.
or up things, but we'll be okay. I expect that we'll have at least 20 people, I hope.
Well, the nice thing is if people need to, they can just use their phones. That's what I've been doing.
Well, we did notify SMPTE headquarters, I believe, so there could be a lot more.
I really like the way these new Zoom meetings are coming out. I think we're coming out with something that will have long value, simply because people can tune in later and watch them again.
Well, there's that, and also we can bring in presenters who don't have to travel and from anywhere in the world.
Yeah.
And even if we have a live meeting, we could still do that because we can project it and have two-way communication. So I think that would be, this.
Hey, sorry about that.
Oh, welcome back.
Yeah, it's funny is I've been having internet problems at home, and so this studio space I'm in, I share with a partner, and usually it's his day to be in here, and I'm like, hey, I can't have internet problems today. Can I switch days with you? And of course, right at 3:45, the internet went out. So I hope it's steady for the next hour.
You and me both.
Yeah. Let me get my stuff back ready to go. Okay.
We have 10 participants now. I'm sure it'll grow as we get close to 7.
Okay. How late are we going tonight?
Pretty much whatever you need to do. I mean, you can you could even go up to 90 minutes if you need to.
Okay. I hopefully not, but if people have questions and stuff, it's early here because I'm in Los Angeles, so I'm happy to stay as long as possible. I want to make sure people feel like they get the most out of it.
You're the second person here from the LA area.
Mr. Beck, Chip Adams here from NBC.
Hi, Chip.
Hello, Chip.
Hey, how you doing, Marty?
Good, good.
Hey, quick question. I was cleaning up my garage. I got a set of pristine AVR2 manuals. If you know if anyone's looking.
Oh, we know of someone.
We would be delighted to have them. I'm sure we'll find a home for them.
Okay, great. And what do you call it? I also have my 79 DAL here if you ever want it. So
that would be interesting too.
It was the one that was originally used on this old house till we switched to a 79E. So.
Well, the museum is where old cameras go to die or be relived, whatever. We'll find a home.
No, this one still works. So.
How are things at the museum, Paul?
Keeping very busy. We provided some cameras, old black and white cameras, for a movie on Julia Child, which was shooting in early October, and that took a lot of work, getting old TK31s to not really work, but to look like they were working. It took some time.
What did you put iPhones inside of them?
No, but a 24 frame person brought in little miniature lipstick cameras and stuck them inside, in replacing the orthicon, and it was quite well done. It looked good.
Wow.
They're doing a pilot of Julia Child's life, and they were doing her first show, which was done at WGBH right after their fire.
So I remember back, it seems to me GBH was shooting with Marconi's.
Well, this was done back in '61 before they had color cameras. But you're right, most of the earlier Julia Childs were Marconi Mark 7s,
yeah,
and then they got the 312s.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I did a show in there one time.
Yeah, Marty, by the way, Marty, my daughter just showed up. I invited her to attend also. She's
okay, there she is. There's her picture.
Hi, sorry, I don't have my webcam.
Hello, Elizabeth.
Hi.
The last time I think I saw you was when you played with the Wellesley Symphony, concerto.
That was like 100 years ago.
It was about
old now.
My wife was in the orchestra.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, she was. I think she was concertmaster then.
And full disclosure, Marty, my daughter's on also. She's a professional violinist does a lot of her own music and stuff. She lives in London, but is now here.
That's interesting. That's very interesting. That's what Elizabeth does.
So where is here? Is it in the snow or is it out in LA?
Oh, Bruce, are you talking? Your thing looks muted.
It was Bob Lamo was asking, where are you located?
To who?
To Bob Lamb.
I was just asking, are you here on the East Coast waiting for the snowstorm, or are you out in LA?
I heard it's snowing already, right? In the East Coast?
Yeah, well, she's based in West Hollywood. I'm a little farther away. I'm about an hour and a half east of LA.
So I've actually played on this League of Legends soundtrack.
Oh, wow.
But I don't remember what year. So it's really good music though.
I have 3 minutes, Marty. We'll synchronize watches.
Yeah, I get 3 minutes. Where's McLean? I'm not seeing McLean on here.
Oh, did he lose internet again?
I don't think so. I think he just popped off for a moment. There he is.
I hope that's the last time. Boy, I had to do some quick rewiring behind my desk, and then there's a machine room over there. And I hope that's the last time. If it isn't, I'm not sure what to do because there's only so much I can control. But hopefully this remains stable. I hope so.
Get your iPhone ready.
Yeah, and I'll just all those hours I spend on this PowerPoint presentation, I'll just mail it to everybody.
I have 2 minutes.
Okay, so we're starting at 4. Good. Then I'm glad we started a little early so we could figure all this out.
Well, don't forget to send the PowerPoint out later because I'll post it next to the recording of the meeting.
Okay, great. Yeah. The only thing I don't think I can share is the other software I'm using to show the interactive music at the very end, but the PowerPoint presentation I'm more than happy to share.
Well, if you look at our website, you'll see that I've been posting the presentations that the people are making a little bit.
Okay.
So you can sort of get a feeling a little bit of what the experience is like that people are generally doing.
Okay, great.
Hey, McLean, is that a telly in the background?
It is there.
Yes.
Yeah. You can't really see it, but this is actually a very nice room that I just moved into. It's a little bit aspirational in terms of how much it costs, but for the moment I can afford the rent.
Yeah.
But there's actually guitars and keyboards and stuff everywhere. It's all kind of
I've got a few. I just sort of a gift from my father.
Oh wow, look at that.
The Angelico.
Yeah, beautiful.
Plays real nice. I need a little bit of setup.
Sure.
Just got it like a week ago.
Great. Oh, it's gorgeous.
And that's an old Gill, 25-year-old Gill. I don't know if you can see that.
Oh yeah, look at that.
Yeah. From Westerly, just down the road here.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
amazing.
So I've got gas, yes, guitar acquisition syndrome.
Sure. Oh, believe me. If you could see the like over the summer, I finally realized I needed to get musician's insurance to insure all of my stuff. And I had to go one by one through every single piece of gear that I bought. And I've never done it my entire life. Some of the stuff is from when I was like 10, 11, 12 years old. And I'm like, oh, I have like 6 figures worth of stuff that I've acquired over the course of a lifetime. I'm glad I'm getting it insured now, because if this stuff all disappeared in a fire tomorrow, I'd be looking for a new line of work.
Yeah. A lot of it's irreplaceable too, especially the old guitars.
Yeah.
We're right at 7 o'clock now. So again, for those of you that are just jumping on, I'm Marty Feldman, section chair of SMPTE New England. And for those of you that aren't familiar with SMPTE, we've been around for over 100 years, originally starting in motion pictures. And we helped develop all of the standards used in the motion picture and television industry, working in every aspect with over 7,000 members worldwide and over 800 standards for everything from time code to digital bits to sending video by IP, you name it, SMPTE's involved in it. Many of you are SMPTE members. If you're not, we welcome you to join. It's relatively inexpensive and helps support the entire development of the television industry. So if you're not a member, we can tell you how to become a member. Paul Beck would be glad to help you with that. And you can be an associate member or a regular member, professional member, corporate member, and so on. So if you're not with us already, we'd love to have you join. Tonight, our very distinguished guest is Mclean Diemer. He is a composer, a film scoring specialist, an artist. We've sent out the complete biography and hope you'll read it and see some of his work. And he's joining us here right in this little box. And I'm going to turn everything over to you now, McLean. Thank you.
Thanks, Marty.
Oh, I think he just froze. If we get in,
I think he's still there. He may have been changing his screen to share. We'll see. I'm still getting a black screen.
Yeah, I'd just get a frozen frame.
This is like the Progressive Insurance commercial.
Yes.
It never fails.
Technology one, people zip.
Boy.
You went away completely now.
Yeah, I was serious about the iPhone. Hello, Glenn.
Well, I just heard from Ron Ford, so I took this opportunity to tell him to join.
Good.
Yeah, we'll give him a minute to try to get back to us. This is happening on a lot of radio shows, these interview shows now, and people are dropping out all over the place. And
Yeah, it happens. You know, I know. Listen to the radio guys on the way home. They keep dropping. One day they drop their entire hosts. You know, like the only guys in studio were able to talk.
yeah, everybody's working from home or from an office. Somewhere.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, it's a problem. They've got to invite multiple guests so that they have at least one left online. I think he's back.
There he is.
Yeah. McLean, you better talk fast before you drop out again.
It's like we're all doing live shows all the time.
Yeah.
He's doing his best.
I think he's got his iPhone now.
Yeah, it could be.
Maybe it's the Santa Ana winds doing this.
Oh God, the devil wins.
They need to take some of that snow over there and use it to melt the stuff.
Well, I just got off a call reporting the Hudson River Valley is starting to see snow.
Oh yeah, it'll be here in Boston soon. You got out just in time, Steve.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah, we only have fires and things like that.
Just fires, earthquakes, mudslides.
But I heard that last Thanksgiving it snowed here. That's what they say.
Really? Wow.
That's what I heard.
Huh. Well, in the mountains, you're apt to get it.
We can see where I am.
Yeah.
We can see the mountain, the Big Bear Mountains from where we are, and on the colder days it's topped with snow.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, I used to fly into Vegas every year about April, middle of April.
Boy, your arms must have been tired.
Yeah. Yeah, they're still aching. Yeah. But used to see the, it'd be like 70 degrees down on the desert in Vegas, and it'd be like, the snow would be on the mountains around Vegas.
70 doesn't feel as warm as it used to. I mean, that's what the temperature has been around 70, but it always feels like really cold for some reason.
Well, is it windy?
Sometimes. And we got some of the Santa Ana winds coming this way were wicked. Like today, there was no wind at all, but I think they had it in downtown LA.
I remember when I worked in the Bay Area, the weather was just so nice and the plants were so healthy and the geraniums were as high as I was. And the people were talking about how the weather was unbelievably cold because there was ice on the Bay Bridge. And that was the hardest weather they got. And they were talking like they were with the Donner Party coming across the
I think McLean's back on now.
Yeah, he's trying. Good audio?
Yeah, can you hear me? I can hear you.
We got you.
Okay. I'm just using the data network. I don't know what's going on with the internet. I'd hate to have to do this every 5 minutes. Despite my lovely PowerPoint presentation, I think it's more useful to at least just do anything rather than nothing. If that's okay.
Do the best you can.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. Well, so I apologize for all the tech difficulties. I thought we'd ironed this out, but there's something going on with the internet in Los Angeles. Maybe like we're talking about the weather. Maybe it's a little too cold for the internet to work here. It's it's 55 degrees. It's all the lines are frozen. So anyway, thank you to the SMPTE organization for having me, the New England chapter. My roots are in New England. I'd like to also thank my friend Jason Clifford for setting this up. It's always, I always have to stop myself because we used to just call him Clifford, and I have to remember that in a professional context, he's not. So I had a whole presentation that I'm going to share, I think, later on, so that it's up on the website. I don't know how impressive this will be with me just talking, but I'm going to do my best. And so, if you have a question, I guess feel free to jump in, or we can save it to the end. I can try to get through this material, and I'm happy to answer any questions that people might have for as long as people have them at the end. My name is Mclean Diemer. McLean is my first name. That's usually the first question that follows an introduction. I am a composer for films and television and video games, primarily video games. I would say my bread and butter, certainly, for the last decade has been video games, although I do live in Los Angeles currently, and when someone comes to you and says, hey, can you do this, before they even finish the sentence, the answer is yes. This is a freelancer town, and you can't really afford to say no because there's 1,000 people behind you that will say yes. Before I moved out here, I went to the Berklee College of Music in Boston. I lived in Boston for 11 years. I didn't actually get a degree in film scoring. I got my degree in a mishmash of things there, songwriting, some synthesis and production, a couple other things. The only way I was going to graduate was if I took a handful of classes from all the majors I kept switching to and combined them into one. I didn't actually think when I was at school that I would get out and do what I'm doing currently. Back when I had a little bit more of this on top, I thought that I would be a rock star. That's kind of every kid's dream, and I tried that for the majority of my 20s, which is how I met Jason. I had a great picture I was going to share of us back in our rock and roll days, both of us with a lot more hair. But I was sort of, as my 20s wound down, I realized that I didn't want to keep chasing that dream. There were other dreams I wanted to chase, and the energy for putting up with that lifestyle was kind of diminishing in me, and I really wanted to put to use the things that I knew how to do well, and actually try to make money at it, not find dead-end jobs that I could quit so I could go on tour for a couple of weeks, or just beg my boss not to fire me when I got back. And so I lucked out. The band that Jason and I were actually in was a band called Bang Camaro, which was, we had a good run in Boston for a while, in the Northeast, I would say. And we did actually tour the country, but I would say the Northeast was our bread and butter. And a core group of that band were actually people in the video game industry. This was about 12, 13 years ago, when there was a burgeoning video game industry in Boston. It seemed like, for decades, the game industry has been kind of headquartered on the West Coast of the United States. It seemed like that was changing. It seemed like Boston was finally going to become this East Coast video game development hub. And it was for a while. And then in the early 2010s, it kind of bottomed out. And there's remnants here and there. There's still a handful of companies left, but it's not what it used to be. And certainly the promise of what it was going to be didn't come to pass, unfortunately. But a couple of these people in the band worked at a studio called Harmonix, which is still around, thankfully. And at the time, they were kind of at the peak of their powers. They developed a game called Rock Band. First, they developed a game called Guitar Hero, and then they kind of developed it further into Rock Band. And if any of you, I'm sure there's a variety of ages here, but
if you played it or your kids played it or your grandkids played it, I mean, it was such a phenomenon at the time. Like I said, 12, 13, 14 years ago. The company was expanding aggressively, and one of the people in the band knew that I was interested in getting into the video game industry. Kind of by hook or by crook, I was willing to do anything. You know, my previous jobs were things like working at Trader Joe's and working in a headhunting office. And these were things I was desperate to leave behind me because, you know, I'm sitting there with this music degree in my hands, bagging people's groceries, and I'm happy to do it. You know, it paid the bills and kept me alive, but that's not really what I wanted to dedicate my life to. So, so when my time with the band wound down, my friend who was in the band was gracious enough to say, hey, why don't you submit a resume to Harmonix? They're hiring really aggressively in the audio department, and if you know, this could be a good way to get your foot in the door. And he was right. It's very gracious. When I basically quit his band, and within a couple of weeks, he was referring me for a job at his day job, which he didn't have to do. So I'm eternally grateful to him. Yeah, I kind of got my foot in the door right at the peak of this rock band phenomenon, and it was a really amazing way to learn how the video game industry works from a professional side. I mean, I had played games previously. You know, I'm sort of that age where I don't really know what the world was like before video games. You know, my parents were pretty strict about making sure that we got outside and didn't have any sort of thing attached to the television that could distract us. But you know, I had friends who had Nintendos, and I had a Game Boy for a while. And in college, I bought a PlayStation with my own money, so my parents couldn't take it away from me. And so, you know, video games have just always been a part of my life. But I only had ever seen it from the consumer standpoint. And it's very different on the other side. It's fun. We're making games and it's entertainment, but it is also a job, and there's a professional aspect to it. And I worked at Harmonix for 2 years, learned how to make stuff very quickly because their kind of product cycle is beholden to the holidays. You know, they need to make sure they get the next title out, usually by October or November, in order to sell a bunch of stuff for Christmas and recoup the development cost of the previous year. So when I got there, I hit the ground running. The first game that I worked on was the Beatles Rock Band, which was the kind of dedicated game just for the Beatles, which was like a dream come true for me. I found out within a week of starting the job, the code name for it at the time was Project 9. And if you're a Beatles fan, the number 9, you know, has some significance in their kind of lore. And somebody was like, oh, Project 9 this, Project 9 that. And I said, hey, what's Project 9? And at the time the company didn't have the rights to the music yet. They were making the game on the promise that the Beatles would eventually sign off on making this, which is a big risk. And they said, oh, well, we're trying to pitch this Beatles rock band. And I was like, oh my God, you know, to think that in some kind of official capacity, my name is attached to the legacy of the Beatles was like a dream come true. And I thought, if this is the only video game I ever make, then I will have been a success in the game industry. Unfortunately, it wasn't the only one. It was just the first one. So I worked on Rock Band after that for a couple more years, and eventually decided I needed a change of scenery. You know, I'd been in Boston for a long time, and was happy there. My life had kind of, through some twists and turns, had gotten to where I wanted it to get to. But, you know, I was young still and single and feeling like, you know, like a young man, like I needed to spread my wings a little bit more. And I started sending out applications all over the world to video game studios, literally all over the world. I came this close to getting a job in Beijing, which I'm, in retrospect, I'm glad I didn't get it, but I was up for the adventure. And you know, after sort of shotgun sending out resumes, other than the Beijing job, the only people that got in touch with me that had any sort of promise was the studio based in Seattle. So for people who don't know, the video game industry is primarily centered in Los Angeles, a little bit in San Francisco. It used to be bigger, I think, in the 90s and early 2000s, and bottomed out, I think, after the first .com bubble burst. And then Seattle is massive because Microsoft is headquartered there. And there's just been, you know, wherever these large hubs for technology exist, people peel off and start coming up with their own little startups. And that, you know, ends up with the Ubers and the Airbnbs of the world. But when you're coming out of Microsoft, there's a lot of tech startups, and some of that is games and entertainment because they have the Xbox brand they've been doing for the last 20 years. So Seattle and Los Angeles, I would say, are the two biggest game development hubs in the country. And I was angling towards getting to Seattle. I really liked it there. I'd been there a bunch. And fortunately, one of these studios got in touch with me, and they were desperate to fill a position. Somebody on their audio team had left on short notice to go to New Zealand to work on, I think, the Planet of the Apes movies. He was like a motion capture specialist that somehow got involved in game audio. And this was his dream job. And so he was like, hey, I got to go. They're making these movies down in New Zealand. See you later. And at the time, the studio was working towards, let me back up. So this studio is called ArenaNet. They make a game called Guild Wars 2, which is a game, it's kind of a role-playing fantasy game, sort of Dungeons and Dragons-ish in the setting. And the type of game that they make is, it's called a massively multiplayer online role-playing game, or MMORPG for short. And what that means is that the game world always exists on computer servers all around the world, and players log into the game, and you can play with anybody all over the world at any time. The sort of world always exists. It's not like a thing where you put in a disc or a cartridge and play the game and beat it and then move on to the next one. It's always there. And the studio always needs to kind of develop content to dangle that carrot in front of players' heads to get them to log into the game. So they were, at the time, this is 2010, the game had not come out yet, but there was some pre-release like marketing hype that they were putting out there. Guild Wars 2 is obviously a sequel to Guild Wars 1. So Guild Wars 1 had a huge fan base, and there was a lot of hype surrounding the sequel that was about to come out. And that summer, they were going to be demoing the game publicly for the first time. It was going to be public and playable by the public. So you could go to a convention where they were showing the game. People could log on and play with us, the dev team. And so that's the backstory. What happened was, a month before this was supposed to happen, this guy left the audio team and left them hanging because there was so much work that needed to be done. So I had kind of preemptively sent them my resume. I don't even think they had a position listed, certainly for not my level of qualifications. But I'd sent them a resume just because, the worst they can say is no, and it's good practice to kind of get in the habit of sending out resumes. And fortunately, when all of a sudden they had a position open, it's not like my name was on the top of the pile. It's like my resume was the pile. The audio director grabbed my resume and said, okay, this guy looks like he could do the work. Let me call him. And I set up a phone interview, and within 2 weeks, I had moved to Seattle. It was like, it happened so fast. On the phone interview, he said, like, when can you start? And I said, if you told me I had to start tomorrow, I would start tomorrow. That was how ready I was. So that took me to Seattle. That job was kind of another jump up for me in terms of the work I was doing. At Harmonix, you're working with other people's music. It's very hands-off, and your role in the audio department is very transparent, I think. You're not writing original music. The biggest role in the audio department on Rock Band was to come up with those if you've ever played the game, these sort of lanes scroll at you on the screen, and you have to match the patterns on your plastic instrument. And that was the job that we had, was to transcribe the music into those little colored patterns that you could play on your little plastic guitar. Creative in a way, but not writing original music, for sure. So at ArenaNet in Seattle, I actually wasn't even a composer then when I first started. I was originally hired as a sound designer, just making sound effects. It's kind of a magical fantasy game, so I'm creating magic spell sounds. And if there's a trebuchet and your character attacks it and the trebuchet falls apart, what does that sound like? And that was my job, was kind of taking raw assets and combining them and making them into something that felt believable when you're looking at it on screen. And I was happy with that work. It utilized a similar part of my skill set, my ability to use computers for, audio production, your ears. It's not quite musical, but it scratches the same itch, and I was totally happy doing that job. And then after about a year and a half, working there, there was a pre-existing relationship with the composer who had worked on the original Guild Wars game and had already written music for Guild Wars 2. But because the game requires continuous development, there was more content that was being developed constantly after the game had already been released to the public. So the relationship with this previous composer deteriorated. He's a very litigious person and a very, like many creative geniuses, he's difficult to get along with. And I think the company had put up with that long enough. So they decided that his contract was up and they weren't going to sign another contract with him. And the audio director came to me and said, hey, I know you're a musical. You're kind of the music guy here. I didn't write any original music, but I would take the music that had been written by this other person and put it in the game and, decide the sort of aesthetics and the technical side of how this music would play in the game. He said, you're the music guy. Can you come up with a list of composers that we can reach out to take over the music for the game? And of course I said, yeah, sure, no problem. And in earnest, I started coming up with a list, and I got maybe 2 or 3 people into this list, when all of a sudden it was like the light bulb went off over my head. And I said, this is probably opportunity knocking as loud as it's ever going to knock in my entire life. And if I don't say, hey, can I at least try to do this, I'm probably going to regret it forever because I may never get this opportunity. At that point, I had truly given up on the dream of making music for a living. I thought being a sound designer is great. It's fun. Lots of people with musical backgrounds become sound designers because, like I said, it crosses over. There's enough of a crossover in terms of interest and skill set, and I can make a good living doing this. But of course, the dream is to make music. I mean, that's like winning the lottery. So I went to my boss and I gave him, kind of my Rudy speech. I said, hey, coach, give me a chance. Let me prove to you that I can do this. I'll do whatever it takes. And at that time, what it took meant doing that job on nights and weekends because I had an actual job that needed to get done. So I said, give me like a trial run, like 3 months to produce some music that I think is good enough to be in the game with the music that's already in there. And if at the end of that, everybody's happy with it, then we can make the switch. And he agreed to that. The head of the company agreed to that, to their credit. And I literally spent every night and every weekend there for about 3 months, just trying to learn how to produce music on a computer. The soundtrack for this game is very much a film score sounding, where it's broad and lush or fully orchestrated music. And like I said, when I was at Berklee, I didn't study that at all. I had no background in that other than I played trumpet in elementary school and junior high school, and that's about it. But the thing is, I had training in music from Berklee, and I could hear it up here. I just needed to figure out the mechanics of getting it out. And I figured that's the hard part I've already got sorted out. I just need to put in the work to figure out the easy part. So yeah, again, I was single, so it made staying nights and weekends pretty easy. And I was there a lot. And eventually I put something in front of them that I said, hey, what do you think of this? And ironically, this was 8 years ago now, about 8.5 years ago. When I listen to that now, it sounds so bad. I mean, it just sounds awful. And I can't believe they even agreed to let me take over the music on that piece of music alone. But, a lot of people think that making music is magic, and they don't really have the same level of discerning ear that actual musicians have, which is not a slight against them because I don't know how to fix a car engine. You know what I mean? Whatever. I couldn't perform brain surgery. That to me is magic. Music is easy. Yeah, anyway, I put this piece of music that I'm frankly embarrassed to listen to now in front of them, and they said, hey, this is great. And from there, I made the transition, and for the last 8 years, I've been writing music full time. So it's not really a short version of my story, but between then and now, I still actually work on that game. The game came out in 2012 officially, but for the last 8 years, we've been adding content to it constantly. I've actually lost track of the number of hours of music I've written for the game. I hear pieces now that I wrote, 3-5 years ago that I've completely forgotten about. And I think, oh, that's pretty good. Now I remember writing that. I should try to do that again. There's some good ideas in there I can develop on. So yeah, it's that moment, that first of all, moving to Seattle to work at that company, and then that moment of getting the opportunity to work on the music for the game, and seizing it, doing a good enough job to impress the right people, changed my life. I currently live in Los Angeles now, continue to work on other games when possible, and occasionally commercials and pitching for television series. I haven't really had things break in the feature film world for me yet, but it's competitive. Even the most successful people are competitive. It's a tough thing to break into. But I'm very fortunate that I've been able to write music full time for the last 8 years, and mostly still working for this one company, which I'm still working on to this day. I have quite a bit of work coming up in the next 6 months, and I'm happy to do it. So that's kind of my background as a composer. I wish that my internet was working, because I had this great presentation I could have shown about how music in game works, but I'll try to discuss it a little bit. Hopefully this is interesting without the fancy graphics. Again, I'm not sure the full range of ages of people here, but music now in games is as sophisticated, if not more sophisticated, honestly, than music for feature films, which has always kind of been seen as the high watermark for music and media. When games started out becoming popular, not so much Pong, but let's say in the original Nintendo era, the Super Mario Brothers and that kind of thing, the music is kind of cutesy and bouncy and light, and part of that is the general aesthetic sensibilities of the people that were writing it at the time, which were primarily Japanese game development companies and Japanese composers, and part of that was the limitations of the technology. It's difficult to describe, but the way that they would write music on those old Nintendo systems was there was essentially a synthesizer chip in the consoles themselves, and it was capable of only producing 4 types of sounds. It could produce 2 square waves, if you know your synthesis, your basic synthesis. So 2 square waves, 1 triangle wave, and 1 noise channel, and that was it. And that was both for the music and for the sound effects. And the people who had to, work on these games back then, I think were just geniuses in the sense that not only were they able to write under those limitations, there's no polyphony. You couldn't play a chord, which is why a lot of that music has crazy arpeggios going up and down. It's because that was literally all you could do. It dictated the style, the limitations of the technology. But so you had those 4 channels to make the music and the sound effects. And when I did some research on this a few years ago, these guys were geniuses, because if you're a Super Mario and you're jumping to get the mushroom that's above your head, there's a little jump sound. But if the music is playing at the same time, it needs some of those same channels that the jump sound effect has. So it will mute the music for the instant that the sound effect plays for your jump, and then instantly unmute it so that it sounds seamless and it sounds like the jump sound is playing over the music, but it actually stops it for a split second, if that makes any sense. And that to me was just, it's unbelievable, those creative restrictions those people had to work on. And if you ask anyone who's probably under 40, 45 years old on the street to hum the theme song from Super Mario Brothers, I think without fail they could do it. It's as recognizable as the theme from Star Wars. It's so iconic, and to think that that's how, the limitations these guys were working under, it's just remarkable. But those are kind of the humble beginnings. That was kind of the way games progressed up through the 90s. More and more sophisticated synthesizer and sampling chips were placed in consoles as they became more powerful, but you're always limited by the capabilities of the chip in the console until the original PlayStation came out. So that was in 1995. And the big advantage there was that you're playing games off of a CD-ROM and not a cartridge. So with the CDs came the capability of playing back what's called Red Book audio, which I'm sure people know about, at least that sort of standard, since this is the standards organization. So yeah, Red Book audio is just the format that audio plays back on a CD still to this day. And what that meant was you could record whatever kind of music you wanted and put it on the disc as long as there was enough space for everything else, for the, you know, the actual code that runs the game and all the assets and everything. There's usually a little bit left over for music. And so you could record anything as long as it would fit on the disc. And that was a game changer. That changed everything. Because now you could, for instance, go out and record live music. It wasn't playing back from inside a chip in the console. You know, as games became more financially successful, the budgets became bigger. So all of a sudden, you know, these people who are creating these stories have big aspirations. And what is the biggest, you know, sort of storytelling media that we have? Well, it's big Hollywood blockbuster movies that have big Hollywood blockbuster soundtracks. And the people making these games say, oh, I want a soundtrack that sounds like Die Hard, you know, for instance, or, you know, Jurassic Park. I want it to sound like that. So if you've got the money, you can have whatever you want. This is America. And so I would say probably about 20 years ago, it became the norm for games that had, you know, high budgets, high production values to have big orchestral scores. It's certainly not the only type of soundtrack, but you know, it's what you expect at the highest level of games, basically. Now it's changed a little bit in the last few years. Games are always kind of looking to Hollywood as the sort of weather vane, creative weather vane. And so as Hollywood still uses orchestras, but it has shifted to very synth-heavy soundtracks. You know, it's kind of the flavor du jour of soundtracks these days. So that has also creeped into games. We call those hybrid scores, where it's like half electronics and half, you know, violins going over it. But anyway, I digress. Some scores are completely electronic. Some are completely orchestral. Most of them are a combination of all those. And so even for the game that I work on primarily, Guild Wars 2, it's primarily orchestral, but there are electronic elements in there. It's very light. It's not quite as in your face as, you know, Mad Max or something like that, but the stuff is in there. In the landscape of composing now, both in games and television and film, you have to be such a jack of all trades and a master of all of them. You can't just be a master of none. You got to know every bit of software. You got to know how to write for an orchestra. You got to know how to work a synthesizer. You got to know what weird, rare instrument they want this sound from and what part of the world that comes from and who plays it and can he be here tomorrow, you know, to record it too. You got to know all that stuff. It's just, it's really intimidating how much you have to know. But like many trades, I think, you learn as you're doing the work, and then the people behind you have already have this advantage that you didn't when you were their age, in that if this is the standard, then they're already being taught that this is the standard, and they come out of school knowing this stuff that you had to figure out on your own. So in a way, I'm envious of kids now because, you know, I didn't even have YouTube when I was in college. You know, we had an actual media library where if I wanted to go watch a video performance of, you know, John Coltrane, I'd have to walk down to the library and go up to the clerk and say, hey, can I have disc number 237? And they go in the back and find it. And, you know, nowadays I could be watching it. I could have found it in 10 seconds while I'm talking to you, which is incredible. So anyway, I'm digressing, which I do, especially since I'm off script for my presentation. So the technology for implementing music in games is incredibly sophisticated, along with what's actually expected of the music itself. Just a little crash course in how games work. There's a couple ways to actually make a game, right? So you can hire a bunch of programmers and you can develop what's called a game engine. And the engine is literally, you know, think about it as like a super powered app on your phone. It's basically an incredibly complex program that takes, you know, does complicated math in terms of 3D rendering graphics, and you know, complicated, it's not so much coding as it is scripting, which is this sort of a subtle difference, but the way it plays back voice lines, the way it plays back music, the way it plays back facial animations and characters, the way the time of day might change, it's all this sort of very complicated set of code called a game engine. And you can make your own if you have very talented programmers, or you can license third-party game engines. And it's much more common to license them just because it saves you several years worth of work, but it comes at a cost. But you know, weighing the cost of, can I hire the talented people who are talented enough to actually do this on their own versus, hey, these guys already got it figured out and they have a whole support network. Why don't I just do that? So there's a game engine that runs the game. Many game engines have sections of them that are dedicated to audio, but a lot of them are not that sophisticated. And so there was an opportunity there. Again, this is America, the land of opportunity and opportunism. So some people over the last probably 15, 20 years have developed what's called audio middleware. And it's another third-party solution that is just dedicated to running the audio in a game. And so you also have to license that. You have to have some programmers that basically get the engine and the audio middleware to talk to each other. But you can think about middleware as a half step between the complicated program that is the game engine and a piece of audio recording software like Pro Tools, or I use Cubase or Logic. It's kind of a half step between those two types of programs. There's limited ability to do mixing and sound design within the audio middleware, so you can kind of make your assets on whatever your audio program of choice is, put them into this piece of middleware, and then continue to mess with it. But yeah, so that's the most common way that people play, not just music, but also all of the sound effects and dialogue that play in games. So on the music side of things, the most basic level of that is essentially like an iTunes playlist, where you just will set up a playlist of tracks, you know, that you've written, recorded, they're all done. You throw them in the hopper and you say, when this character walks into this area of the map, choose randomly from one of 7 tracks. And then when that's done, wait somewhere between 30 seconds and 2 minutes, and then pick another one of these tracks, but not the one you just played. And that's kind of the most low-level logic in terms of playing music back in the game. And the easiest to write for, because you just kind of have to write what inspires you. Make sure you fill up those 7 slots, you know, like a shopping list. And when you're done, you move on to the next map or the next quest or next, you know, sort of area of the game that requires some musical attention. That is primarily what Guild Wars 2 is like. It's you know, it's an outdated. The engine itself is a little creaky. It's not very sophisticated, but for that type of game, it works. You know, there's a lot of that game is about exploration. So you as your character walk around this massive world, and you know, you don't need so much sort of interesting, dynamic, shifting music. You just kind of want to hear something pretty when you walk over, you know, a hill and see a beautiful vista laid out before you. You want to trigger a piece of music that will stir the emotion of that moment. And so that's primarily what I do for Guild Wars. For other games, you know, that are much more sophisticated, this middleware it's unbelievable. And this is truly what differentiates game audio and music from film and television. So in the game world, you know, in the game audio world, we call it interactive music, because that's what it is. It's interactive. And we refer to movies and television as linear media, which is comes with it's a little bit of a pejorative term, because, you know, it's like, you know, you folks with your linear media, you've got it easy. But, you know, the big differentiator is in a movie, it's linear, right? You hit play, it starts, goes all the way to the end, it ends. You know, there are people that have tried to play around with that format with sort of choose your own adventure things in the last few years, like on Netflix. It's still not quite as sophisticated as games, but in general, when you're writing music for a movie, you're handed a scene by the director, you talk about the emotional beats across that scene, and then you just start writing music, and you try to start it appropriately, hit all those beats, and then you end it. And once it's written and approved and recorded, it's done. It never changes. Excuse me. In games, there can be moments that are linear like that, and you can score them traditionally. But for the most part, the experience of the game is dependent on what the player is doing, and the players are unpredictable. You know, the game is set up to give players options and to subtly guide them in the way you want to tell the story or guide the experience. But if you're standing on a map and you're supposed to go straight and make a left, and the player's like, I don't want to do that, I'm going to turn around and go right. You have to kind of anticipate that that might happen and set up systems to react accordingly, right? So, so what does that mean? There are two ways of thinking about the music in interactive music in games. There's a horizontal approach and there's a vertical approach. And I had these awesome slides I spent all day working on today that show this, that I hope you take a look at after this if you're curious. But what does that mean? What does a horizontal approach to music mean? Horizontal means that you conceive of what you would think of originally as a linear piece of music once it's all put together, but you might break it up into 3 chunks. So say you've got, you know, A, B, and C. And if you put A, B, and C all together, you get what sounds like one cohesive piece of music, but you had to conceive of it and write it in as if it's 3 different pieces. And you set it up in this game, in the middleware. You set it up so that, okay, when a player walks into, you know, a dungeon and crosses a certain threshold, chunk A is going to start playing, and it's going to fade in. There's going to be a little bit of a fade in, and A is going to start playing. And it's maybe a light texture, some violins come in or something. And then as they proceed deeper, it's going to seamlessly transition to chunk B, and they're going to crossfade seamlessly. You won't even notice that it's happening. It's just going to sound like it happens. And so B, you know, maybe the woodwinds come in or a French horn starts to play a melody. You know, the music develops a little bit. And that's your exploration music. And, you know, that chunk B might actually loop, you know, an indefinite number of times based on how slowly or quickly the player's kind of progressing through the map. And there might be some micro variations. You know, you might have a chunk B-01 or B-02 that are slightly different from each other. So when it loops, it doesn't sound like it's just playing the same 8 bars over and over again. And then, you know, you might cross over into a area of this dungeon where there's an enemy, right? There's a giant troll that's going to fight you, and all of a sudden it seamlessly crossfades into big combat music. So, you know, the tempo changes, the violins start playing aggressively, the big brass comes in blasting away. And you've thought of that encounter and worked it out before you even wrote a single note to say, okay, you know, if this is playing for this amount of time and then it transitions to this, how am I going to make that happen? And then at any point in time, if in the second loop, I need to be able to jump to the third loop. So how do I make that transition musically make sense? And then, you know, not make it so that the player can tell, oh, they just switched the music. That's sort of the horizontal approach. If that makes sense, I hope it does. And if anybody wants some more clarity on it, we can talk about it afterwards if we do a Q&A kind of thing. The other approach is a vertical approach. And this takes advantage of multi-channel audio in an interesting way. So you actually have, you'll write music and sub-mix out certain sections of the music into, usually it's common to have 6 different stems or 3 different stereo stems, right? So it's a 5.1 file, but it's not actually a surround piece of music. It's just taking those as, instead of 6-channel audio in surround, it's 3 sets of stereo channels. And what'll happen is you'll walk into this, let's say you walk into this dungeon, you know, and chunk A starts playing. But chunk A starts playing, but you can only hear maybe a low synth pad and maybe some low strings playing. But what you can't hear is that there's 2 other tracks that are playing at the same time, but they're muted, right? So you're walking along and you just hear this kind of stuff playing. And then you cross over into that room where the boss is, and all of a sudden the audio middleware, it's like pushing the faders up, all of a sudden turns up those other tracks. And now you start to hear, you know, aggressive strings playing and some woodwinds playing some stuff over top. And, you know, you have to think about the music vertically. So you're kind of designing one big piece of music that's always playing, and then thinking about what situations will turn up what instruments and what subsections of it. And I hope that makes sense. And the truly sophisticated systems in music utilize both of them. So you have a horizontal approach to the different chunks of music that are playing and a vertical approach to how they're mixed. And all of that is happening dynamically. So the game is essentially doing like checks. So there's the game, you set up all these little hooks in the game that say, is the player within 10 feet within the game space? Are they within 10 feet of an enemy? No. Okay, reset it. A second later, are they now? No. Okay, reset it. Are they now? Yes. Now that means we trigger this other combat chunk of music. And all those little calculations and checks are happening constantly every second that you're playing. And it's truly remarkable to think about the complexity of not only just building the world itself, but then anticipating all these things and testing it and hooking it up. It's really miraculous that games get made at all. You know, sometimes I wish we had the luxury of the movie and TV industry where, you know, you just put some people over there in a room and you light it and you put some makeup on it and then you point a camera at them. You say this, do it a little faster. Okay, great, we got it. You know, I wish we could do that in games, but we start from nothing, less than nothing. And so that's kind of, you know, that's really the current state of the cutting edge of game music. I had some examples. There's a link at the end of my presentation again, which I hope you'll look at, to a composer, a French composer who gave a talk at a convention called the Game Developers Conference a few years ago. Game Developers Conference is kind of like the AES convention, but for games. You know, it's really where all of the professionals from all over the world come to the Bay Area for a week, and there's lectures and kind of postmortems about the projects people have been working on for the last couple of years, discussions over the latest kind of trends and technological advances. And this one composer had worked on a game from a French company called Ubisoft, and the game is called Remember Me. The composer is, now I'm going to butcher it because it's in French, but his name is Olivier Derivière, and so it's spelled like Olivier Derivière. But he gave this hour-long presentation on how he scored this game, and this guy is a genius. I mean, it is the most sophisticated version of this level of interactive music I've ever seen, and he did it all with a live orchestra, which meant that he had to write the music, plan for these horizontal and vertical structures, and then break it out so that on the days that he went to do the recording sessions, he'd say, okay, you got to play these 4 bars, stop at the end and let the reverb tail off, and then we'll go to the next 4 bars and we'll do it again. And then, you know, had to piece all that together so that it sounded like a seamless flowing orchestral soundtrack. It's got to be the most difficult version of these interactive music systems is with orchestras, because you have 100 people in the room who are used to just playing all together, and you have to try to make them think and perform like machines so that when you do put it into a machine later on, it all works. So that his talk will explain all this stuff in much greater and impressive detail than I'm able to over my phone. And if you're really curious, I suggest looking that up. Also, the most common audio middleware is a piece of software called Wise, spelt with 2 W's. Some people say W-Wise, but I'm pretty sure it's just pronounced Wise. W-W-I-S-E. And it's made by a company called Audio Kinetic. And that's the most common and I would say most sophisticated version of this audio middleware software. And I had this great demo I was going to show. Maybe I'll since I can't show it live, I'll record what I was going to show everybody, and we'll put that up along with the slide presentation because it is pretty impressive. If you're curious to learn how to use it, it's a very intimidating piece of software. But if you're curious how to do just music on it, they have great tutorials on YouTube that they're always updating. So if you look up the Audio Kinetic, all one word, Audio Kinetic YouTube account, and you know, kind of look through their playlists, they have some great tutorials on how to use Wise from the absolute beginner level. So that's kind of all that I had to talk about. I'm sorry you had to look at my giant Charlie Brown head the whole time, but again, I encourage anyone who's curious to look at my slides after this and the video that I'm going to provide of the Wise kind of demonstration. And I'm happy to answer any questions that anybody might have about anything. It could be, you know, how do you write music, to what's it like working in games for 10 years? I don't know. I'll answer anything. I'm not going anywhere.
Hi, back here. I have a question, if I could. Sure. When you're dealing with this horizontal and vertical creation of music, how do the musicians, if you have 20 or 30 or 40 musicians and you're conducting, how do they deal with trying to do things in little segments like that?
Yeah, so it's very common, even in movies. This is sort of a method that was pioneered by Hans Zimmer at this point, probably 20 years ago. It's called striping, but basically what striping is you know, you have a whole orchestra, but maybe no, I'm sorry, you don't have a whole orchestra. You do it in sections. So one day you just have the brass come in and you have them sit where they would normally sit in a full orchestral seating, so that it sounds, you know, acoustically sounds like it's coming from the right place. You mic them up just the same way you would as if there was a full orchestra. And then you just run through the brass parts that day. And then the next day you have a string section come in and do the same thing. They're all sitting in the right place. The mics are all in the right place, and you just have them run through the brass. I'm sorry, just have them run through their string parts. And so that gives you the level of control that you need, especially to do the vertical. That's mostly for the vertical side of it. For the horizontal side, you have to just say, hey, we're doing these 8 bars, and you have the score prepped in a way that is like, you know, we're doing measures 23 to 56 now. And they'll be, you know, it'll be broken up so that they know when they get to 56, they stop, they don't breathe, they don't clap, you know, they don't do it, they don't put their instrument down, they hold it for 5 seconds, and then, okay, we got a clean take, and now let's move on to 57 through 120, you know. So it's a combination of those two things. It's very tedious, and I know that the musicians would prefer not to do it that way, and I think that even some composers would prefer not to do it that way, because you're dealing with issues of timing and tuning. You know, these people have been trained to sit in a room with 100 other people and listen to everybody and make sure that they're all playing and creating one cohesive sound. But, you know, the reality is they can have their kind of, you know, artistic, pure creative aspirations, and then they can also want a paycheck. And so in Hollywood especially, you have to adapt to that kind of thing. And that's just the norm. And the people in Los Angeles and London and in other parts of the world, you know, mostly Central and Eastern Europe are better at it. But I would say London and LA are the premier, and Nashville actually has gotten very good at this in the last 5 years. They are very good at having a set of headphones on, listening to a click track to make sure that they're totally locked in, and knowing that they're going to show up on the day with only people from their section, and they have to stay in tune. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you very much. It sounds like it's very labor intensive.
It is. And, you know, there's other aspects of it other than the technical side too, because nowadays the people who do the final dubbing, this is more common for movies, but the people who do the final dubbing, you know, maybe you've got a 100-piece orchestra just blasting away, but there's something in there that's cutting into the same frequency range that the lead actor is saying the most important line in the movie. So what do? They pull the music down. And having all of those stems of all the different sections available to them means that maybe they can just cut out, you know, the violas instead of turning the entire thing down. So having that level of control is important for people beyond just the music side of things. And within games, what's really interesting about games is when you have all those bits and pieces and chunks, there are people whose jobs, they're like these amazing technicians who usually have musical backgrounds but are very technically minded, and they will take, you know, let's say 2 hours of recorded music, but it's all broken up into chunks. They will put that into this audio middleware software, and they can turn that into 11, 12 hours of music within the context of the game by, you know, mixing and matching things that are at similar tempos. Or let's say we only have, you know, a choir and French horns playing, whereas we recorded an entire orchestra plus a choir for this section. But if we come back to this moment, we'll mute some of this other stuff. So they can stretch it in ways that is incredibly impressive to me. So, you know, it's all about flexibility. And even if it feels stressful and frustrating and unmusical, the end result is better for it. So then the ends justify the means in that situation.
A follow-up question: has the issue of not using human musicians but using a synthesizer or something else that is a sampling device, has that entered into this in any way?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I would say most of the stuff you hear on television and the streaming services, with a couple of exceptions, are almost entirely sampled instruments, because it's faster and cheaper. It's definitely not better, and I don't think anybody would argue that it's better, except for the bean counters and the people, the producers saying, "Hey, we got to get this done because it's supposed to go live in a week." From a creative standpoint, it's just the reality of the job. I mean, when I'm writing, this was another thing I had examples of. When I'm writing music, it's all done with sampled instruments. I will say that sampled instruments are unbelievably sophisticated now. However, they still don't sound as good as the real thing. Even the ones that are recorded in the great sound stages of the world, you can buy a sample library that's recorded at Air Lyndhurst, which is, one of the top 3 recording studios in the world. It's in London. It's this big, beautiful old church. There's a company called Spitfire that just, raised enough money to record every single section of an orchestra in that room. And, they've recorded scores for the Marvel movies in there. They've done the Harry Potter movies in there. So you're using, theoretically, your violin section are the same people that played on Harry Potter, the same people that played on Iron Man. And yet, to get those sample libraries, it's again a very technical process. It's not very creative. And so it doesn't have that emotion, that like intangible thing to it. But most people can't hear the difference, don't care. When I hear, when I watch Game of Thrones, that the intro, the cello especially, that's a live cello. I know that guy who played that part. He's an amazing cellist. He's probably done very well from having played that. He's certainly gotten hired again after that recording session. But when I watch the show itself, unless it's a big set piece moment, like in the opening episode of a season or the season finale, it's definitely samples. And that's because the time constraints that the composer had to crank that out under, and it's fine. And even with a fully real orchestra, like again Hans Zimmer, for example, is kind of the pioneer in this. If you're watching Pirates of the Caribbean, there is a real orchestra playing there, and there's also his samples mixed in with it, because that's part of his sound. It creates an otherworldly sound that you can't actually capture in real life, and it requires both of those elements. And even stuff that I've done, for Guild Wars, it needs to be. I like to make it feel realistic, just in case we ever get. I've done some live recording, but a lot of the stuff has also been samples. And if we ever get the opportunity to record stuff that was purely samples live, I want to make sure it's 1-to-1. I don't want to get stuck in a trap of writing for more instruments than are capable of playing something. So I try to be very strict about my orchestration so that it's realistic and feels real. But even when we record it live, if I'm doing a piece of combat music, there's big taiko drums and stuff, and I don't have the budget to do more than just the core orchestra. So the drums in that scenario are going to be samples. Again, that's just the reality of things. But it is amazing how far just a little bit of live instrumentation over samples can go. So if I have the budget to record a flute soloist over sampled orchestra, it's night and day. It lifts the whole thing, and your only focus is on the humanity of that beautiful flute solo. And sometimes it's even as simple as me just getting a shaker out and putting a shaker over it, and the imperfections of that sound gloss over the roboticness of everything else. So yeah, that's just the reality of media composition in 2020.
This is refreshing to hear this. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Marty.
Yeah, I'm wondering how much artificial intelligence is entering into the gaming music area now.
Yeah, there's this is a topic that a lot of people like to talk about, and it's an interesting one. I don't know. My job is sort of because I work in entertainment, but it's also technology. Keeping up with tech stuff is kind of part of the job. And so this came out yesterday. For anybody who saw this, Google released this really interesting, artificial intelligence opera generator, and it was these 4 kind of cartoonish looking blob characters for bass, bass, tenor, alto, soprano parts. And you would click on one and drag your mouse up and down to change the pitch, and then drag it left and right to change the syllable. And it was all done. All of the kind of crazy counterpoint and Bach sort of intricacies of the voice leading and stuff was all done completely with artificial intelligence. I would recommend, tonight if you're bored, I would recommend checking this out because it's really entertaining and it actually sounds great, even though it's these goofy kind of bubbly blob cartoons. Stuff like that, that's so rigid in terms of the musical rules that it's based on, is really easy to do with artificial intelligence. Stuff like following a a traditional film score, flowing emotion of a scene is a lot more difficult. And I have yet to hear anything that sounds convincing in that regard. But that's just for orchestra. I think if there are games that have come out that have completely, it's called procedurally generated, right? So there are games that have come out that have completely procedurally generated soundtracks based on building blocks. But those are mostly synthetic, not just sampled or synth orchestral instruments. They're purely synthesizers. It's a little easier to fool your ear into saying, oh yeah, this is good music. It doesn't really work with acoustic instruments yet. It might someday. But to my ear, I think that, I can see reality shows using purely AI and procedurally generated music because the standard of music for those shows is so low, frankly. The Bachelorette doesn't need the composer for The Bachelorette to come in and write music for that show. It's not necessary. You just need, the video editor to come in and say, oh, this is when Diana shoots a nasty look at Greg, and so we want to hear a cymbal scrape there. That would be really easy. And I think that that's probably the future of that type of music. That's not the kind of music I'm interested in writing, so I'm not really worried about my job. But there are a lot of people who make their living writing that kind of music, and they're going to be forced to adapt, as we all are. Every few years, something changes, something new comes along, and you can either pretend like it's going to go back. I mean, think about globally the situation we're in. You can pretend that it's going to go back to how it was in February 2020, or you can say even when everybody's vaccinated or immune, there's probably going to be some stuff that's a little different, and it's no different with music and entertainment.
I've got another one. How formulaic is the writing, say, for gaming versus motion picture or TV? What are the differences? I'm trying to get a handle on what the differences are in terms of style, how you do it.
Sure. Like I said, it really flows. It really follows with movie scores. They really are the kind of pinnacle of what is expected things to sound like. So in the last 10 years, that very staccato, percussion-driven orchestral sound that was pioneered by Hans Zimmer is still very much the most popular type of sound. Where a guy like Hans Zimmer, he's a very talented musician, but he's not classically trained. So he came in to writing for the orchestra, from a pop music background, and he pulled the orchestra away from the traditional John Williams, Jerry Goldsmith. These guys were steeped in the classics of early 20th century, late 19th century romantic, orchestration and composition. He pulled away from that, and it's still pulling away from that. You always kind of need that foundation. You really need to know, the fundamentals of how to write for an orchestra, but the level of intricacy required is no longer the same as it was. I mean, sometimes I'll watch a movie from the 90s, and eventually you get familiar with the same sort of 10 guys who write all the music for everything. But every once in a while you'll come across a B movie, that has some composer that maybe did 2 or 3 movies, but never really broke out or never stuck around, or for whatever reason isn't working in the industry anymore. And even some like totally no-name soundtrack, no-name composer in a movie from 1993, the standard was so much different that it's like, oh man, this is an awesome soundtrack. Who is this guy? Oh, I've never heard of this guy. He did 2 movies and disappeared. The barrier for entry is a little lower in terms of traditional compositional knowledge. But like I said, you kind of have to know all about everything else. You have to know how to produce on a computer. You got to know about synthesizers, all that stuff. So I'm not sure that answered your question, but in terms of tropes and stereotypes, I mean, the Hollywood film score sound will always exist as a baseline, and it'll come and go over the years, but it'll always come back to that when the hero grabs the damsel in distress in his arms and and swoops in for a kiss, you want to hear the strings swell. Doesn't matter what, doesn't matter when, doesn't matter what genre. That's what you always want to hear. And so you got to know how to write that kind of thing. And then, you know, if it's a sci-fi movie, then you put a synthesizer on top of it.
There are stuff on the internet, how anyone can write film music, and it gives you all these stereotypical transitions of chords, and this is for this emotion, go from this, B flat seventh, whatever, to the, it's interesting. I happened to run across it, and it was fascinating, but I'm not sure how realistic it is.
Yeah, I mean, if you really want to distill it down to just like, hey, this chord going to this chord sounds like this, yeah, you can do it to that level. I think it misses a lot of the nuance. For instance, people who are musical out there, John Williams likes to write a lot in the Lydian mode, right? Which is a raised, I always forget, it's the raised fourth degree of the scale or something like that. So anyway, I wish I had a piano here. I could play, two chords next to each other, and you would be like, oh, that's totally a John Williams thing. He did it in E.T., in Jurassic Park, in the Star Wars movies, and Indiana Jones. It's just like his thing, and it conveys a certain lift of emotion, but it leaves out all of the other unbelievable things he puts into those two chords. He's not just sitting there and saying, hey, strings, play this note and then play this note. It's so much more detailed than that, and I think dumbing it down like that does a disservice to the people who think they're learning something. If someone's selling the chorus saying, hey, go from C major to D major, and you'll sound like John Williams, that just seems they're pulling something over on you, and I'd be suspicious of those kind of people. I see the same thing. I get YouTube recommendations like that all the time, and people trying to sell courses like write like John Williams. And if it was that easy, I'd be doing it too. It's not. I'm in the wake of John Williams, trying to parse all of these beautiful details that he puts in his music and say, how can I even get a tenth of the way to where he is? So there are a couple tropes that are the foundation, and a lot of it is also about speed. If you're on a deadline, you got to write fast. So yeah, when the hero grabs the damsel in distress, you know that it's going to do this, but you try to make it, put some kind of unique spin on it that is your own and is appropriate to the story and the soundtrack as a whole.
Something that a lot of people don't know is John Williams has written a lot of good chamber music that doesn't sound anything like his movie music. He's quite
he's such a, it's interesting watching the public opinion of him change. I mean, if you go back and read articles from 1980 something about him, all people could talk about was how he was ripping off this composer and ripping off that composer. There's a lot of explanations about why he made certain choices that are similar to sections from The Rite of Spring and all that kind of stuff. To me, first of all, it's a really old argument, and he's written enough music to prove that he is a very talented, genius composer in his own right since Star Wars, which came out, almost 50 years ago. I wish that the base level of musical discourse in film and television and game scoring was as high as, that we can say, oh, John Williams isn't good enough to rub shoulders with all these other composers. I mean, no one working today will ever get to his level. So that just shows you, how things change over time. I mean, and like you said, as just a pure composer, I mean, the guy's a genius. He's the greatest living composer. We'll be lucky to get another person like that in anyone's lifetime.
Any other questions?
I'd like to ask you a little bit of a question about the mixdown process.
Sure.
Where you're doing things like recording full orchestration with voices, and then you go into the mix and you do a lot of variations. What's it like working with a sound technician during the mixdown as a sound designer?
Yeah, a lot of that is budget dependent. Most of my work, Guild Wars, is because there's so much content that needs to come out, the time frame that we have to develop it, and the money that's there to put into it. I do a lot of it myself. When we have, I would say about maybe a third to just under half of the music that I've done for the game, we've been able to record live, which is an amazing luxury. The rest of it hasn't been. And so the stuff that has not been recorded live, I'm in charge of the whole thing. I write it, I orchestrate it, I do the final mix myself, which is something I'm still improving at, but I've gotten a lot better at it. And I feel like I'm pretty good at it now. And then when it comes to doing a live session, I have the luxury of living in Los Angeles, and there's so many people who specialize in those aspects of putting the finishing touches on stuff that I actually prefer to have somebody else's ears on it. There are times where I'll hand some material over to a mixer and I'll say, let me know when it's ready for me to check it out. And then I'll go in and we'll do the last 5% together, because I'll say, no, I'd really like this a little bit louder. Can you put a little bit more reverb on that? But I trust them. There's sort of a shorthand or an unspoken level of knowledge about what we're all trying to go for. So if I hand somebody, for instance, the last score I did this with was for a science fiction game, a game called Crucible that came out. Unfortunately, it just got shut down, but it was released over the summer by Amazon. Their first venture into video games. Huge failure, historic level failure, and they shut the game down about 2 months ago. So you can't even play it anymore, which is unfortunate. But I wrote all this music for it, and it's a science fiction game, and I would say it's about 60 to 70% synths and percussion that I did in my studio, and then about 30%-ish live stuff on top of it. So string overdubs, soloists, that kind of stuff. And it was so sonically dense because I had so many synthesizers going, playing all sorts of stuff, and I was doing my best to pre-mix it on my own so that it sounded good coming out of my speakers. But then I lost perspective. There's so many elements going on all at once. I thought I need to get a fresh set of ears on this. So I condensed it as much as I was comfortable with into, okay, here's a couple of synths that can exist on one stem, and here's all the strings in one stem, and down to 7, 8, 9 elements. And then I sent it off to a guy who did the mixing, and he threw it into Pro Tools, worked his magic. He has no stake in the music. He just wants to make it sound good. So he's coming at it completely fresh and blind. And then he'd say, okay, come in and we'll go over some of these mixes. And I'd go in for an hour or two. We'd listen through everything and make a couple tweaks. And then I'd say, all right, that's good. It's done. And then he would print out the final mix for me. And, that's the people who work at the very top. That's how every project works. I'm sort of straddling the line a little bit, and sometimes I have to do it myself. And like I said, you have to be a jack of all trades and a master of all of them because, there might not be a budget to hire somebody else to do it. So if you're going to put your neck out there, you better be confident that you know what you're doing.
So when you're working with another mixer, then you give him all your pieces. Do you give him an idea as to what you're looking for so that he can do the mix and see what happens, or does he have a chance to just do it all on his own?
Sometimes I'll use a reference and say, hey, I was going for this kind of thing. But like I said, there's only so many. There's only so much innovation that's happening musically in the entertainment industry. So usually it will fit into one of a handful of slots. In fact, this mixer was recommended to me by somebody who I know at Sony. Sony Computer Entertainment is the arm of Sony that is in charge of the PlayStation and all of their game developers, and it's a massive chunk of Sony. And I know someone there who is a music, in movies and TV, they call them music supervisors, but he is called the music director, but it's his job to be the liaison between studios and composers, work out this kind of nuts and bolts of how we're going to produce a soundtrack. And I said, hey, I'm working on a soundtrack for a game that has these heavy synth and percussion elements. It's very modern sounding, but I'm blending it with the orchestra, and I'm so steeped in just pure orchestra stuff that I need someone that can handle this, that can do the mix for me, because I'm not confident I can make it sound as good as it can. And he recommended this guy because I said, this is kind of the sound I'm doing or going for. Do you have any ideas? And he knew the right person, and this guy was the right person. And it worked out great. So, some of that still requires like the human element of like asking for help and hoping that the person you're asking has the answer to your question.
Any other questions for McLean?
I got one. McLean, you, first of all, I want to say excellent presentation. And I would also strongly recommend, going over the McLean's website, mcleandiemer.com, because he's got some great examples on there as well. And he's also a great follow on social media. If you're friends with him, he's got some great clips that he posts regularly. But anyway, do you find now that the video game industry has grown so substantially, it's almost like, film used to be, you created a 2.5 hour, 2 hour movie. Now it seems like actors are drawn to series, you get sort of this 5-season, long, really well done piece of work. And do you find that with the video game industry growing as substantially as it is do a lot of musicians and sound designers want to get involved in the video game industry versus, say, film or TV?
Absolutely. Yeah. So this is a piece of my journey that I left out. But so I graduated from Berkeley in 2003. It was a long time ago now. And right when I was getting out, that was right when Napster was kind of the big headline in the music industry, and this fear about the internet and downloading music for free. And of course, you've seen, where that's gotten us. Almost 20 years later, everybody has Spotify. Nobody buys CDs anymore. And artists, if your name isn't Taylor Swift, you're probably not making money on recorded music. And so all those people's fears about MP3s and the internet being representing the destruction of the music industry all were true. So, when I was getting out of school, there was all this doom and gloom around the traditional music industry. And I remember seeing articles, even back then, saying things like video game sales in 2003 outgross movie tickets and CD sales combined. And this was almost 20 years ago that I was seeing these headlines. And, even though my dream was to be a rock star, I still wanted to give it a shot because I was a young man. That's always stuck in the back of my head and said, well, if I'm going to try to figure out how to make a career in music, the dream is to be an artist and people come to you and say, we think you're so great, get whatever you give us, we're going to buy, we're going to make you rich and famous, and we're all going to love you. And even that is an illusion for even people like Taylor Swift. There's so much involved in terms of being a savvy business person and marketing and navigating the behind the scenes business stuff. But that's the dream we all had when we were young. But I was, credit to my parents that there's a little bit of pragmatism that they drilled into me. And so I thought, if I want to, would I be happy with only being an artist or doing anything else? Is it all or nothing for me? And the answer was no. I'm happy with different shades of what this dream is. And for a while that was being a sound designer. I was happy doing that. And now it's doing video game music. And I get to wake up every day and write music. Am I, the super famous rock and roll guitar player playing arenas that I wanted to be when I was 16? No, absolutely not. But you know what? Most kids never get to that point. And kids don't even listen to music with guitars nowadays anyway. So I was born at the wrong time. So yeah, game definitely with young people. And I say young, meaning even like 30 and under. I'm 39 and kind of on the tip of the spear, I think, for that sort of generational shift. But young people with dreams of getting into media and entertainment scoring specifically, almost all are aiming for video games and not movies and television. I would say that balance has shifted dramatically over the course of this last generation. And of course, because I live in Los Angeles and people love to talk about the work they're doing and what are you working on and all this stuff. Movies have even pre-COVID, are not they're not the powerhouse they once were. And if you're not wearing a brightly colored costume with a cape, your movie might not even make money, let alone even get made. You might not be able to convince a studio to give you money to make your movie if you're making. What did I just watch recently? I was like, man, they don't make movies like this anymore. I think it was Death Becomes Her, which is also kind of like a pretty out there movie. I mean, it's not like a traditional drama, but it's a great movie. I'm like, man, they do not make movies like this anymore. So, Hollywood is very risk averse, and the risks become bigger, but the guarantees are a little bit more secure, right? So it's like they're putting up $200 million to make a movie, but they know it's going to make $1 billion. So that's a bet they're willing to take. And what that means is that the pool of opportunity for work is shrinking. You know, would I love to score a Marvel movie or a Star Wars movie? Absolutely. I'm probably further back in that line than I am for the COVID vaccine. You know, there are so many people that are ahead of me in that line. I'll probably never get to that point. That might change. I don't know, but probably not. But you know, is there a likelihood that I could get a gig scoring a popular Netflix or a Hulu series? Yeah, those odds are a lot better. However, you know, there's still a lot of people in line for those gigs, and the people who used to score the mid and lower tier movies, since those have gone away, a lot of them have moved towards television production. And as the people that are getting pushed out of television production, they're saying, well, where's the money? Oh, games are big business, you know? And it's sort of a two-sided affair where these people say, oh, I should get into games. That's easy because I do big movies. I can score a game. That's just kid stuff. And so they think it's simple without knowing the sort of technical sides of things. And that tends to crowd out the people that came up strictly through the game industry. There's a little bit of tension, I think, between the big shots and the people who are more homegrown talent. You know, there's like big free agent signings, and we're from the farm team. And then the other side of it is that on the biggest scale productions for games, their aspirations are as big Hollywood movies. I mean, you know, a lot of people that do the writing for games come from movies and television because they see interactive entertainment as a much more interesting frontier than movies and TV, which are kind of set in their ways. You know, they've been around for 100 years ish. You know, in one form or another, and there's a lot of tropes that they just sort of, this is how movies and TV are made, whereas interactive entertainment is still kind of the Wild West. So these people come in from Hollywood or with big Hollywood dreams, and they say, oh, we need a great soundtrack. We need it to sound like, you know, Star Wars. So why don't we get not John Williams, but why don't we get a guy, you know, a big name guy? Hans Zimmer scored a few games. You know, there's been a few other people that are big names that have scored games. James Newton Howard and Howard Shore, you know, these are kind of titans of film scoring. But I will say that the game industry they're a little skeptical sometimes of people that try to make that crossover and say, oh, I could just walk into the game industry and get a job. So, you know, that balance, I think things will settle out as, you know, people my age get more towards middle-aged and late middle-aged and age out, and then further generations of young kids grow up and to the point where you've got 2-3 generations of people who have only ever known video games as the popular form of entertainment. You know, people will, instead of saying, oh, I did this, I can easily do that, they'll just say, I only want to do that. And I think that conversation is already starting with kids these days.
McLean, I got another one here. Sure. Is scoring for virtual or augmented reality projects, anything going on with that? Yeah, absolutely. I would say about 5 years ago, it seemed like, so I mentioned this before at the Game Developers Conference, this really is the biggest sort of premier show that people who make games on a professional level go to every year. And about 5 years ago, VR was all anybody could talk about, you know, and it was a big topic of conversation. And a couple of, you know, it was about 5 years ago that the first real consumer grade headset was released by a company called Oculus, which is owned by Facebook. And I had one of those. I still have it, actually. And it's great, but it requires you to set up sensors around your room. It requires you to have a big enough space. And then you have to put sensors, infrared sensors kind of around the edges of your room. And then the headset is like hardwired to your computer. So you're sort of tethered to it. And, you know, all sorts of stories of people breaking their TV screens or knocking over furniture. And, you know, I've even done it a couple of times where like, I got the headset on, swinging around at something, and I accidentally hit the cord that, you know, controls the ceiling fan and turn it on. I haven't broken anything yet, thankfully. But it was a little clunky. And so that initial promise wasn't quite delivered on in terms of how widespread it would be as a consumer piece of electronics. But the content, you know, people have been making VR content now for probably 6 or 7 years, which is a lifetime in game development. And just a couple months ago, Oculus released what I think is truly the first like killer app version of their headset, where
There's no wires at all. It's just a headset that's very light and low profile, and you have 2 controllers you hold in your hands, and no wires at all. It all is sort of self-detecting. It's unbelievably advanced. It's truly miraculous. And you can just walk around your house, and you have to be careful. But in the world that you're experiencing in the headset, you are free to walk anywhere. It's not like the holodeck where I could take it outside and I could walk for miles, and with no restrictions, which is incredible. Hopefully not get hit by a car. So yeah, writing music for that is not something I personally have done. I have a bunch of friends who have. There's an interesting philosophy there. Like when I play games, there's 2 types of music that I notice, which are that it's these headsets have built-in headphones, or you can plug in your own set of headphones, but the audio can be spatialized so that it sounds like it's coming from within the world to make you immerse yourself in the space even more. Or it can just play back in traditional stereo, which is kind of what I prefer. It just feels a little bit more natural. Like if I'm hearing an orchestra and I turn my head to the left and the orchestra perspective changes, it takes me out of the moment. But yeah, writing music for VR has the same sort of levels of, technical intricacies of vertical and horizontal stuff like I was talking about. It's still, I mean, if video games are the Wild West, virtual reality is like, we're talking pre-Columbian era. It is so undefined as to what it actually is. There's innovations happening every month, but I think it's really exciting. I mean, the ability to remove the 2-dimensional barrier, the looking through a window effect at a story, and fully immerse you in it. There's only a handful of games I've played, and not even just games, but experiences that I've played that feel so real, and stir different things than even the best produced game or movie do. I think it's really exciting.
What about scoring for indie films? Who's doing it? Is it a good way to get into the business? Is it amateurish, or are there professionals scoring for indie films?
Yeah, I would say, independent. That is a broad spectrum, because it could mean somebody who just graduated from film school who has $10,000 of their dad's money and want to make a movie, or it could mean somebody who a top shelf director who had an idea that a studio wouldn't pay for, and so they went to Netflix and Netflix made it, and that technically is an independent movie. Yeah, that's also unbelievably competitive. I think a lot of people, I have a lot of friends who score, small and medium level independent stuff, and that's how they make their living. And you'll never be a millionaire off of it, but you can, pay the bills, and you can save up enough to buy a house, even here in Southern California, and you can do pretty well. And you never know when, or if you'll get scouted by people and say, hey, we loved your soundtrack for this movie. We'd love it if you did it on this. For instance, kind of one of the sort of biggest up and coming names of the last few years is I think he's Dutch maybe, or he's Norwegian. His name is, or maybe he's Swedish. He's Scandinavian. His name is Ludwig Göransson, and he's pretty young. He's actually younger than me, and he came out of USC, and one of his buddies at USC has a great film scoring program. Probably USC and Berkeley, I think, are the 2 top options for film scoring in terms of college programs. He came out of USC, and one of his friends at USC was in the filmmaking program, and they also have one of the premier film schools in the country, or in the world, really. And his friend is a director named Ryan Coogler. They made a movie called, I think actually he met him. I think Ryan Coogler directed some episodes of a TV show called Community, which was, not huge, but it was semi-popular, 7, 8, 9 years ago. And then his first feature.
I think the gremlins have caught up to us again.
Uh-oh. I can hear you.
Let's see if he pops back in a minute or two.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, I can hear and see.
Okay. Yeah, I can hear you guys.
Okay.
So yeah, I'll try to make this short. So Ryan Coogler, his first feature film was called Fruitvale Station, which was a independent film about an incident with the police shooting a young man in the subway in Oakland. This is a real based on a real event that happened maybe 10 years ago. So he made that movie. Ludwig scored it. Low level stuff, but it became a sort of film festival circuit darling, and then an award show darling. And then from there, he directed the Rocky. It's not really a remake, the sort of reboot that came out called Creed, that maybe 6-7 years ago, which is a great movie, by the way. Ludwig scored that, and then all of a sudden, his next movie is Black Panther, right? And it's just like, bam! Now all of a sudden, you're in the big leagues. I would say that trajectory is the exception to the rule, but it is very much possible that you meet someone who's a young and up and coming person, and they have great ideas and just don't quite have the means to execute the highest level stuff, so they come up with a story that's at a manageable level for their budget and their time, and you work your way up. I mean, honestly, that's how Spielberg and John Williams kind of paired up. I mean, John Williams had been a TV composer in the 60s. He did like Lost in Space and some other stuff, and then he got into movies doing the arrangements for Fiddler on the Roof. I think that was one of his first big movies. Actually, he was a studio session piano player in the 50s and I think he played on West Side Story as a piano player. He was credited as Johnny Williams.
Johnny Williams.
Yeah, and then and then he came up through television, and then did some movies. He did a bunch of disaster movies when those were popular in the 70s. And then Steven Spielberg directed a TV movie with a different composer, and then he did Jaws with John Williams. And even though John Williams was like 40, he was 41 or 42 when he did Jaws, but he'd been around for 10 or 12 years already. But no one knew who he was. He was kind of just a jobbing composer, and then all of a sudden, boom, he skyrocketed into this person. So, that things are different, but in certain ways they're the same. And nowadays, that same type of story happens with games, where a lot of colleges have game development programs. Kids go to them specifically to learn how to make video games. You sort of assemble your little team of people at school. You spend a year making a project. And sometimes you release it and it becomes a big hit, and sometimes you just finish it for a grade, and then you go on and make a real game once you get out in the real world. And that's also very common. It's kind of the video game version of that same story.
Any other questions? Well, McLean, I want to thank you very, very much, especially working without your visuals. And,
I know.
if you could post them.
But anyway, for the people who really want to know, it'll be there for them to check out. And I'm not sure who's watching this or whatever, but if people want to get in touch with me, on Twitter, it's very easy. My Twitter handle is just my full name, Mclean Diemer. I'm blessed with a very unique name in this era of Google search optimization. It's my parents figured it out 40 years ago. They're like, no one's ever going to have this name. So I'm easy to find. You can contact me through my website. There's a contact page, and that'll go straight to my email. And I'm of the opinion that it's important to share the things. Even though I feel like I'm still learning, it's not until I talk to someone who's 19 or 20 at a college, or it doesn't even have to be a kid, but talk to anybody who's curious about this stuff. And I always think about me talking to myself in the past. If the version of me that was working at Trader Joe's could talk to the version of me now, he would have so many questions. He would just be in awe of the things I've done, and I still feel like I've got more to do. So I think it's important to share my experience and share any bit of knowledge I can. So I'm an open book. Anybody is welcome to ask me anything.
Yeah, just send us all of your contact information and whatever you have, visuals, and
sure,
we'll make that available to everyone. And we'll probably make this recording available on demand from our website as well, which is
and if you send a little bit of instructions on how the visuals should complement, like if people should play the visuals in synchronization or whatever, I'll put instructions up so people will see that.
Okay. Yeah, I tried to, even though I sort of rambled, I tried to follow generally the structure that my PowerPoint presentation was. So I'll put a little, table of contents that can help people.
Yeah, yeah. I think
Very
it
good.
was a
Thank
very,
you.
very interesting presentation, and the two will go very well.
Oh, great. Well, thank you
Thank you
again.
so much. Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much. It was great.
Good,
Yeah,
good call,
thank you all.
Jason.
Thank you for being here. I know it's late there on the East Coast, and thank you, Jason, for
Yes, absolutely.
for
McLean, you
thinking
are
of me.
Good
you are
call,
amazing.
Jason.
You are amazing. So thank you for doing it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Look forward to seeing all of you at our next month's presentation. Watch your emails for exact date, and that is with Floracal on station automation for the real TV geeks among us. Good night now.
Snow just starting in Rhode Island.
Yeah. Oh boy.
Bye.
Good night, everybody. Thank you.
Good night. Thank you.